You see this white shape at the top of the world and think you know it. Greenland, ice, polar bears, nothing else. But take away the snow and something else appears. Human bones, lost children, forbidden experiments, and a colonial chain that stretched across an ocean. This is the story you will not find in a school book. The wind does not howl here, it whispers. In the long dark of a Greenland winter, when the sun has disappeared below the horizon for weeks, the world becomes a dim blue twilight. The snow reflects a light that has no clear source. The sky flickers with bands of green and purple that move like slow, silent flames. You stand at the edge of a frozen fjord. The sea is locked under a solid skin of ice. The only sounds are the soft creak of the snow beneath your boots and the distant, hollow groan of the ice shifting in the dark. On a map, Greenland is just a white shape at the top of the world, a blank, an empty space. But nothing about this place is empty. Beneath the ice, there are bones. Beneath the snow, there are stories. Beneath the silence, there is a history that was never meant to stay buried. Tonight, we will listen to that history. This is Greenland, Dark History Beneath the Ice, Part 1, The Invisible Colonial Chain. Welcome to Wonderworld. For thousands of years before a European flag touched this land, people lived here. They call themselves Kalalit, Inuit, people of the ice. To survive in Greenland is not a simple thing. This is not a gentle landscape. For most of the year, the temperatures fall far below freezing. Storms can roll in with almost no warning, turning the horizon into a gray wall of snow. The sea, when it is not frozen, is cold enough to kill a person in minutes. But for the people who were born here, this was not a place of constant suffering. It was home. It was a teacher. They learned the language of ice. They knew by the shape and color of a crack whether it would hold their weight or swallow them whole. They knew which winds carried the scent of seals and which winds meant that polar bears were near. They built homes half buried in the ground to catch what little heat a winter sun would give. They crafted kayaks from bone, wood, and animal skin that were so perfectly balanced that a skilled hunter could roll them completely underwater and surface again like a seal. They did not waste. They did not expect comfort. They expected struggle, and they built a culture that could look struggle in the face without turning away. In that culture, nothing was truly dead. The world was full of spirits. The sea had a spirit. The mountains had spirits. The animals taken in the hunt were not simply meat. They were beings who had given themselves to keep the people alive. That gift demanded respect. If hunters broke taboos, if they disrespected the animals or the land, the spirits would turn away. The sea ice would crack at the wrong moment. The storms would come earlier than expected. The seals would vanish. Survival depended not only on skill, but on balance. In winter, when the storms pinned people inside for days and the lamps burned low, stories were told. Tales of drowned women whose hair moved like seaweed beneath the ice. Stories of creatures that waited beyond the last line of houses in the dark. Stories of glacial crevasses that were not just holes in the ice, but mouths that could swallow not only a body, but a soul. These were not fairy tales. They were warnings. They were maps. They were memory. For centuries, for millennia, the people of the ice listened to their land, and the land answered. Then one day, new shapes appeared on the horizon. Shapes that did not belong to this place. Shapes that had crossed an ocean to get here. Sails. They came from across the North Atlantic. Norsemen. Vikings. In the late 10th century, a man named Eric the Red left Iceland and sailed west, searching for land. What he found was an island the size of a small continent, bound in ice, with only a narrow strip of stone and tundra along its edges. It was not green, not in the way his people understood the word, but he named it Greenland anyway. It was a promise as much as a lie. If he called it Greenland, more settlers might come. They did. The Norse built farms along the southern fjords. They brought cattle and sheep, tools and iron, crosses and priests. They built churches of stone that still stand in ruin today. They tried to recreate a small piece of Europe on the edge of an Arctic world that did not care about their borders or their stories. For about 5 centuries, they clung on. They raised their children in homes warmed by smoke and animal heat, spoke their language, practiced their faith. They hunted seals and walrus alongside their livestock. They traded ivory and furs for wood and metal from Europe. And all the while, not far away, Inuit communities continued to live as they had before, moving with the seasons, following the animals, reading the sky. 2 worlds existed side by side. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought. Mostly, they survived in different ways. Then slowly the balance shifted. The climate cooled. The soil, never rich, began to fail after centuries of grazing. Trade routes changed. Ships stopped coming as often. Storms grew harsher. The Norse struggled to adapt. They tried to hold on to their cattle, their churches, their European habits, even when the land was telling them that it was time to change. The Inuit were listening. The Norse were not. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements were gone. The farms empty, the churches abandoned. Their cattle bones lay scattered in the soil. Their houses sank into the earth. No written farewell, no final message. Just absence. Greenland, in the European imagination, faded again into that blank white shape at the top of the world. A curiosity, a distant memory. But the Inuit remained. The stories remained. The land remained. For a time, the ice kept its silence. Then, in the 18th century, different ships arrived. These ships carried a new kind of power. Not just explorers, not just farmers. They carried empire. When the Danish-Norwegian missionary Hans Egede sailed to Greenland in 1721, he did not come to ask what the people who lived here believed. He came to tell them what they should believe. He had read the old tales of the lost Norse colonies and imagined descendants waiting to be brought back into the Christian fold. Instead, he found Inuit communities who had their own stories, their own gods, their own ghosts. People who did not ask for a new religion, but who were told they needed one. The cross that he raised on Greenlandic soil was not just a religious symbol. It was a marker, a claim. From this point forward, what happened in Greenland would no longer be decided only by the people who lived here. It would be written in offices and parlors thousands of kilometers away, in Copenhagen. In the minds of men who would never feel the Arctic wind on their face or hear the ice crack beneath their feet. At first, the reach of Danish power was limited. Trading posts, missions, attempts to regulate who could come and who could leave. But like the slow advance of a glacier, the control grew, layer by layer, year by year. Greenland became a colony in more than name. Economically, politically, culturally, it was bound to Denmark with invisible chains. From Europe, Greenland was seen as remote, exotic, almost unreal. From Greenland, Europe was a distant force that could decide the price of seal blubber, the rules of trade, the language taught in schools, without asking those who would live with the consequences. The people of the ice were no longer just surviving their environment. They were surviving policies. In the 20th century, those policies became harsher, more ambitious, and, at times, deeply cruel. In the decades after World War II, Denmark adopted a new approach to Greenland. In official language, it was called modernization. In practice, it often felt like something very different. Greenland was no longer just a far-off colony. It was part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a strategic territory in the Cold War, a place with resources that might one day be valuable, and a people who were expected, increasingly, to become something more like Danes. Plans were drawn up in Copenhagen, not in Nuuk, not in small settlements along the coast, on paper, in ministries, on desks. The idea was simple on the surface: move people from small, scattered villages into larger towns. Give them better housing, better schools, better access to health care and modern goods. Integrate them into the Danish welfare system. Give them a taste of Scandinavian modernity. But this modernity came with a price. Many small communities were closed. Families were told to leave their ancestral homes, their hunting grounds, the graves of their parents. They were moved into concrete apartment blocks in larger towns. The rhythm of life changed overnight. The old skills that had kept people alive for generations were suddenly labeled backward, unnecessary. Children were placed into schools where Danish was the language of instruction. Their own language, Greenlandic, was pushed aside. The message was clear, even when it was not spoken aloud. To be modern, you should be less like yourselves and more like us. Greenlanders had almost no say in these decisions. They were not asked what they wanted. They were told what would be done. The connection between Greenland and the outside world was tightened, but not under Greenlandic control. Travel, trade, even information flowed through channels decided elsewhere. If a Greenlander wanted to move, to study, to work abroad, or even to understand how policies that affected their lives were made, they ran into walls of language, law, and bureaucracy. The colonial chain did not always look like soldiers with guns. Sometimes it looked like paper, sometimes like a schoolbook, sometimes like the arrangement of houses on a map, and sometimes it looked like an experiment. In the 1950s, a group of Greenlandic children were taken from their families and sent to Denmark. Officially, this was done in the name of opportunity, education, a better future. In reality, it was an experiment. These children were meant to be turned into a new kind of Greenlander, fluent in Danish, educated in Danish schools, raised in Danish foster homes and institutions. They would, in theory, return to Greenland as a kind of elite, a bridge between cultures, a proof that the colonial project could create modern citizens out of backward subjects. No one asked the children what they wanted. Many parents did not fully understand what was happening or were pressured to agree. Some believed their children would have a short stay abroad. Many did not realize how completely stripped of their language, family ties, and culture their sons and daughters would be. The children grew up between worlds, not fully Danish, no longer fully able to return to the lives they had left behind. Their childhoods became data points in reports. Their identities became collateral in someone else's idea of progress. Later, some of them would speak about the loneliness, the confusion, the sense of being unmoored from any place they could call home. The experiment did not produce the shining examples policymakers had imagined. It produced a generation carrying wounds that were hard to name because they were not visible. At the same time, a different, even more intimate experiment was unfolding. This one did not just take people from their families. It reached inside their bodies. In the 1960s and 1970s, thousands of Greenlandic women and girls were given intrauterine devices, or IUDs, known as spirals. In theory, contraception is about choice. The ability to decide if and when to have children is a form of power. But in Greenland, many of these spirals were not about choice. They were about control. For years, authorities were concerned about Greenland's birth rate. They worried about the cost of social services for a growing population. They questioned whether too many Greenlanders might become a burden on the Danish welfare state. They applied a logic that treated people not as lives, but as numbers. So, a policy emerged. Insert contraceptive devices into young women and even teenage girls, often without proper explanation, without informed consent, and sometimes without any real understanding on the part of the girls themselves that this had been done. Some were as young as 14. The procedures were carried out in clinics and hospitals. For the officials overseeing this program, it fit neatly into a certain way of thinking. modern, efficient, rational population control. On paper, the reports spoke the language of healthcare, planning, public interest. On the level of individual lives, the reality was starkly different. Women later recalled being told little or nothing about what was being put into their bodies. Some discovered the presence of an IUD only years later. Others connected long-term pain, infertility, and emotional distress to a decision they had never truly been allowed to make. Their ability to choose the size of their families, to decide the course of their own lives, had been quietly taken from them. It was not a single dramatic atrocity carved into stone. It was a pattern of small, repeated violations carried out under fluorescent lights, recorded in medical files, filed in cabinets, then forgotten by those who signed the orders. Forgotten, perhaps, by them, not by the women. When a state or a distant government begins to treat the bodies of its colonial subjects as a problem to be managed, the boundary between care and control dissolves. What remains is something cold, something that looks at a girl and sees not a person, but a statistic. For the people of Greenland, the colonial chain was not only around their economy or their politics. It had been wrapped quietly around their most private spaces. And always behind these policies, there was another motive. Resources, power, the land itself. Greenland is not rich in the way that temperate countries are rich. It does not have wide fields of wheat, endless forests of timber, sprawling cities thick with factories. Its wealth lies hidden under ice and rock, minerals, oil, gas, the possibility of future shipping lanes through melting Arctic seas, strategic military locations that seem, from a map in a distant office, almost perfect. For Denmark, Greenland was never just a responsibility. It was an asset. Control over Greenland meant potential access to whatever lay beneath its frozen surface. It meant a say in Arctic affairs. It meant a place at the table in conversations about future shipping routes, defense strategies, and energy deposits that might become accessible as the climate warmed. That control did not require the input of Greenlanders to be claimed. It was exercised through laws, through treaties, through economic arrangements that kept ultimate authority far away. Greenlanders fought, slowly, for more autonomy. Home rule in 1979, expanded self-government in 2009, a growing sense, across decades, that the people who live on this island should be the ones deciding its future. But the legacy of earlier decisions did not disappear when new documents were signed. The relocated settlements did not move back. The children who were sent away did not recover their lost childhoods. The women given spirals as teenagers did not all regain the futures that had been quietly redirected. Colonialism in Greenland was not simply an event, it was a system, a set of habits, a way of thinking about who has the right to decide and who is expected to accept. And while Denmark was managing its colony, the wider world was changing. A new kind of threat was passing over the Arctic. Its shadow fell across Greenland, too. During the Cold War, the Arctic was not empty. It was a corridor, a potential battlefield. To reach North America from the Soviet Union, or the other way around, the shortest path was not across the equator, but over the pole, across Greenland. This simple fact turned the island into something powerful countries coveted, not for its people, not yet for its resources, but for its position. Air bases were built. Radar stations were placed like silent watchers along the ice. One of the most infamous projects was a U.S. military installation buried under the surface, a base hidden in the ice itself, with tunnels and rooms carved from frozen water, designed to test the idea of deploying missiles under the Arctic sheet. It was called a research project. It was also something else, a sign that the cold, white surface of Greenland was seen as a convenient cover for experiments that would never have been accepted in more populated, more visible places. Waste was left behind. chemicals, fuel, materials that, at the time, were not considered a problem because everyone believed the ice was eternal, solid, unmoving, a perfect vault. Whatever was buried there under the snow and frozen water was assumed to be locked away forever. But ice is not permanent. It moves, it melts, it remembers. Tonight we have walked through only part of Greenland's story. We have stood in the silent dark of its winters. We have watched as Inuit hunters traced paths across frozen seas, guided by knowledge carried in stories, in taboos, in whispered warnings. We have seen foreign sails on the horizon, Norse farms blooming briefly and then vanishing like a breath in the cold. We have listened as missionaries and officials arrived, bringing Bibles, laws, schools, and policies written in a language most Greenlanders did not speak. We have followed the invisible lines that bound this land to distant desks in Copenhagen, lines that shaped where people could live, what language their children would learn, and what would be done to their bodies in the name of progress. We have heard about experiments conducted on children whose only crime was being born in a colony, about spirals placed in the wombs of teenagers and young women without the respect of true consent, about an island treated as a laboratory, a training ground, a resource bank. And we have watched as bombers and radar domes and secret bases crept onto the ice, as Greenland became an unwitting piece on a Cold War board game played by superpowers far away. If this were simply a story of the past, it would be dark enough. But the ice that once seemed still is moving. The glaciers are retreating. Permafrost is thawing. Things buried in another century are coming back to the surface. Toxins once locked in frozen soil. Graves of those who died and were laid to rest in ground that no one believed would ever melt. Pathogens, perhaps, that have slept in ice longer than any empire has existed. Hidden waste from military projects that were never meant to be seen again. And beneath all of that, under kilometers of bedrock and ice, lie minerals and fuels that the modern world is hungry for. The chains that held Greenland in place are shifting. Old colonial policies echo in new negotiations. Old decisions made in secret boardrooms cast long shadows over new debates about independence, autonomy, and ownership of the land itself. In the dark, the wind still whispers. It carries questions. What happens when an island built on ice begins to melt? What rises with it? Old ghosts or new powers? Traumas from the past or conflicts of the future? In the next part of this story, we will leave the past behind and step into the present. We will look at a Greenland where the consequences of colonial policy are written in statistics and scars. We will trace the new routes that ships are beginning to take through warming seas. We will watch as powerful countries circle this island, drawn by the promise of shorter flight paths, new naval lanes, and the glitter of rare minerals under thawing ground. We will ask what it means for a people who have survived ice, famine, forced relocation, and quiet experiments on their bodies to now stand at the center of a new global scramble. For now, the night over Greenland is still. The aurora folds and unfolds itself across the sky like a slow, silent curtain. The snow creaks. Somewhere, beneath meters of frozen water, a buried barrel shifts slightly as the ice around it softens by a fraction of a degree. The past is not gone here. It is waiting, and the ice is beginning to remember.